Good afternoon, everybody. Um, Welcome to this session, the fifth and final webinar of this series on the current stage of consultation over the Lewes Local Plan. These webinars are part of a wider programme of engagement and communication activity. And today's session will focus on infrastructure, community facilities, design, and the built environment. This session will be recorded, so if you or any of your colleagues or friends or community members would like to watch this back, please check on our website, the Lewes District Council website, over the coming days, and the link will be available for you to watch again. This consultation phase on the Lewes Local Plan was launched on the 29th of November and will run until 8th of February 2024. And as we get into the session this morning, I will put the link to the consultation into the chat of this Zoom session. I'll also put the frequently asked questions link in there as well. So you can take a look at what other questions people have asked, which might answer some questions you've got. It might also prompt some questions that you might want to raise. In a moment, I will hand over to my colleague Nadine, who will provide some background and context. We will then hand over to other members of the Lewes District Council Planning Policy team for the main presentation for today. As with all of the sessions in this consultation programme, the last part of this hour will be dedicated to questions and answers from yourselves who are watching today. So please put your questions in the chat function. And we will either come to those questions at the end of the session, or we will commit to answering any questions we don't get round to, or for which we don't have an answer today. We will commit to putting those answers into the frequently asked questions link on the council website. So without further ado, I will hand over to Nadine. Nadine, I see you're sharing the slides, so over to you. Nadine, can I just check, are you able to hear me? On my screen, it looks like you've frozen. Yes. If we just bear with us, colleagues, we will just see if we can get Nadine back onto the call. Just 1 second. Yeah, so Nadine, just for everybody who's watching, Nadine has just left the meeting and will be joining back in. So we'll just be 1 moment before Nadine's able to pick up the slides and update everybody. So we'll just be 1 moment whilst we get that sorted. Thank you for your patience. Just whilst we're waiting, I will share the links in the chat to the consultation page of the Lewes District Council website and also the FAQs. So I'll do that now just whilst we're waiting for Nadine.
Good afternoon, everybody. Apologies for the slight technical hitch there. I think I'm now back on and you should be able to hear me. For those of you who've got your cameras on, because this is being recorded, can I suggest that you turn your cameras off? Otherwise, you will be forever recorded and posted on the YouTube channel in addition to the consultation page. Okay, without further ado, I'm just going to share the screen and hopefully it will be the right screen. You will see. Right, okay. The purpose of today's session is to, as we've done with previous sessions, is to give you an overview of the policies and the theme. So today's themes are the infrastructure, community, facilities, and the design and built environment themes. These are the final two sessions, or the two themes within the plan that we intend to cover. And so the presentation will cover both the policies as well as what the policy directions are intending to do within each section. Okay. So just by way of background, as I said, it's covering the themes of infrastructure, community facilities, and the design and built environment. And I'll, at the end, very briefly set out what the next steps are for the local plan. So starting with the policy context, as you're all aware, no doubt, and as I've said at previous webinars, planning in England is a plans-led system. What that means is at the top of the hierarchy, the policy framework is the government's national planning policy framework, which sets out what the government expects us and our local plans to include. And in terms of the sort of areas of the NPPF, if you did want to go away and read through that document, then on infrastructure, this is a running theme. There isn't a standalone chapter or section within the NPPF which deals with this. It is very much something that you will find referenced and mentioned throughout the document. But just by way of some pointers, chapter 3, which is around plan making, there's reference there to infrastructure and in terms of requiring local plans to in their preparations to cater for and plan for infrastructure. In delivering a sufficient supply of homes, again, infrastructure is a key requirement set out in chapter 5 and so forth. On community facilities, chapter 3, again, which is the plan making one, and chapter 6 and chapter 8 are the other two areas to look at for the framework there to set out what is being expected from the from the framework and the local plan. And then on achieving well-designed and good places, chapter 12 is within the NPPF sets out the requirements and what the local plan would have to be in conformity with. So those are that's the policy sort of context in terms of why we're looking at those areas within the local plan. In terms of just as a reminder, before we get into the main bit of today's webinar, plan making is a long and complicated journey. We started our process a couple of years ago, and we have completed, as I've said, the issues and options stage, where we've looked at what issues the plan should be looking to address through its policies. And as it says on the screen, we had over 42,000 comments to that consultation, which we've processed and published our response to those alongside the consultation on the preferred options. In terms of the plan making stage, we are at a point where we're at the very early stages. So if you look at the line along the bottom, we're at the stage of preferred options and policy directions. Our next step is going to be preparing a draft local plan, which we intend to consult on in the spring of next year. And all the way to the right is when we get to examination, and then the expectation is report before we can adopt it as our planning document. That, in a quick nutshell, is the policy background to today's session, as well as where our place in the plan making framework is. I'm going to hand over to Matthew, who's going to take us through the first theme, which is infrastructure and community facilities. Matt, when you're unmuted.
Thank you. So yes, I'm going to talk about the infrastructure and community facilities policy. We can move on to the next slide, please.
Okay.
So now the provision of new and improved infrastructure that meets the requirements of new homes is critical to ensuring the sustainability of the area. The policies within this theme will aim to ensure that development is permitted only where there is sufficient capacity at the existing local infrastructure, or any new or improved infrastructure facilities will be provided at the time that they're needed. We also want to make sure that we can retain existing valued community facilities and services and help to ensure that services provide people's day-to-day needs that are accessible via sustainable transport. In order to do this, we're proposing 11 policy directions relating to infrastructure and community facilities, which I'll talk through shortly. But first, I just want to talk quickly about the evidence that's informed this section. So, delivery plan. Preparing an infrastructure delivery plan, or IDP, which will identify the key infrastructure that's needed to deliver the growth that's identified in the plan, including who's responsible for it, when it is needed, and how much it will cost. At this early stage of producing the plan, the IDP seeks to identify where infrastructure may be required and where deficits in provision exist, using the evidence that we've currently got available. Following this consultation, this draft IDP will be used as a focus for detailed engagement with infrastructure providers to understand what type of infrastructure the plan will need to secure and where existing plans and programs may contribute to providing additional infrastructure capacity. The water cycle study scoping report seeks to identify any constraints on housing growth that may be imposed by the water cycle, and how these issues could be resolved. It also seeks to identify if existing water infrastructure capacity and environmental capacity could constrain growth across the plan area. The water cycle study scoping report identifies that further investment is likely to be needed in the future to increase the capacity of wastewater treatment works to accommodate new homes and businesses. Further evidence will be provided within a detailed water cycle study, which will be prepared as part of the next stage of the local plan. This detailed water cycle study will assess network capacity for growth allocations, both in terms of wastewater and water supply, and it will be done in liaison with Southern Water and South East Water. It'll also identify the likely infrastructure required to accommodate the proposed growth. The settlement services study is the next piece of evidence that seeks to provide an updated understanding of the settlements in the plan area in terms of the way that they function and what services are key for creating sustainable communities. It identifies a list of key services and facilities that are considered to be important for day-to-day living and assesses each settlement in terms of whether it has these services available. This study shows that coastal towns have all the key services available, and the majority of the larger villages have reasonable levels of service and facility provision. However, it also identifies connectivity varies across the local plan area, with remoter rural villages and hamlets having less available services and less connectivity in main towns. The Lewes District Open Space Strategy comprises an assessment of the quality, quantity, accessibility and value of open spaces within the district. The assessment identifies existing deficiencies in the quantity of provision of allotments, community gardens and city farms, parks and gardens, and provision for children and young people. And the study makes recommendations for the amount of different types of open space that we should be looking to provide in the future. Linked to the open space strategy is the playing pitch assessment. This suggests that there is limited spare capacity for football, rugby, hockey and artificial pitches by the end of the plan period. And the sub-areas with the highest projected deficit of supply are the coastal band and the eastern part of the district. It recommends that we continue to protect all playing field sites in order to reduce the risk of loss and subsequent impact on sport and physical activity provision. One further evidence study is the shared transport evidence base. Through the shared transport evidence base, we've undertaken some initial transport modelling to assess the high-level transport impacts of future growth in order to provide an early understanding of the potential transport infrastructure requirements. This report shows that transport infrastructure improvements are likely to be required to accommodate further growth, and this would include junction improvements as well as sustainable transport improvements and behavioural change. Further detailed modelling and testing of transport impacts will be undertaken once the growth locations have been confirmed. Next slide, please. So moving on to the policies. The first policy is policy IC1, infrastructure provision. New development creates additional demand for infrastructure and services, and it's reasonable for developers to address these needs in order that development is sustainable. As Nadine mentioned earlier, the NPPF does identify that all plans should align growth and infrastructure. As previously mentioned, we're preparing an infrastructure delivery plan, which will identify the infrastructure that's needed to deliver growth in the plan area. The policy will identify that development should only be permitted where it can be demonstrated that there is sufficient capacity within the existing local infrastructure to meet the additional requirements arising from the proposed development. Where development would create the need to provide additional or improved infrastructure, the developer will be required to work with the relevant infrastructure providers to ensure that these improvements are provided at the time they're needed. The policy will support the development of new infrastructure, including community facilities, in appropriate locations where there is a local need for the infrastructure and they are in close proximity and accessible to the people that they serve. Next slide, please. The next policy is policy IC2, water supply and wastewater management. This policy will ensure that there is sufficient infrastructure to deal with demand for water supply and wastewater management arising from new development. National guidance confirms that planning policies can be used to ensure that new development and mains water and wastewater infrastructure provision is aligned, and to ensure that new development is phased and not occupied until necessary works relating to water and wastewater are being carried out. Further evidence on this will be provided within the detailed water cycle study, as I mentioned previously. The policy will require that proposals for new development demonstrates that there are adequate water supply and wastewater treatment facilities in place to serve the whole development, or that improvements are being made to water supply and wastewater infrastructure that will be in place prior to development being completed and occupied. Next slide, please. Next policy is policy IC3, digital infrastructure and communications. Digital infrastructure is considered to be essential strategic infrastructure and is necessary to support more inclusive and sustainable communities, especially those living within more isolated areas. Over the planned period, the use and demand of digital communication is forecast to grow, which could help to reduce transport demand and traffic volume, especially at peak hours. The expansion of broadband and digital infrastructure is important to support sustainable forms of employment, and will encourage the development of enterprises in the plan area. The policy will seek to provide clear assessment criteria and guidance to applicants about the considerations that will be expected to be taken into account for digital communication and infrastructure equipment. Where existing equipment cannot be used and planning permission is needed for new telecommunications equipment such as masts and base stations, then applications will be expected to demonstrate its necessity and sympathetic design in line with national and local plan policies. Next slide, please. Next policy is policy IC4, safeguarding community facilities. Access to community facilities is essential to social cohesion and the quality of life of residents. The local availability of such facilities reduces the need to travel, and particularly benefiting the less mobile and more deprived members of the community. The Settlement Services Study identifies a number of types of community facility as being key services that are important for day-to-day living. This includes doctor surgeries, chemists, primary schools, convenience stores, post office, and community halls as the key services that need to be accessed most regularly. Secondary schools, libraries, public houses, places of worship, dentists, nurseries, cash points and petrol stations are also identified as other important services. This policy will set out the strong presumption that land or buildings currently used or last used for community facilities, and that includes sport and recreational facilities, are safeguarded against loss to other uses. The policy will be clear that the loss of a community facility would be considered acceptable only in exceptional circumstances, and will set out the criteria that will be needed to justify this. It will also encourage local communities to seek asset of community value designations in order to help identify the community facilities that are most important to them. Next slide, please. Next policy is IC5, commercial community facilities. There are some commercial uses that are also key community facilities, such as small local shops and public houses, which play a key role in the sustainability of communities. However, the commercial element of these uses means that they may need to be treated slightly differently in policy terms to the other community facilities. Similar to policy IC4, this policy will seek to resist the loss of commercial community facilities. However, also need to require evidence that the building or premises has been appropriately marketed to demonstrate whether there is a demand for the commercial community use to continue. This is different to the other types of community facility where there is less likely to be a market for an alternative operator. Next slide, please. Next policy is IC6, outdoor playing space. National planning policy emphasises that open space, which includes outdoor playing space, should be taken into account in planning for new development. In line with government guidance, it's considered essential that adequate provision for outdoor playing space is made in association with new housing developments in order to meet the recreational needs of new residents and to avoid exacerbating existing deficiencies. Outdoor play space provision will be required to be provided on new development appropriate to its scale and location. Provision should be made on site in the first instance. However, if this is not practical, then financial contributions will be sought to improve existing or provide new facilities off-site. Policy will set out the level of provision of outdoor playing space and children's play space that will be required. Next slide, please. Next policy is IC7, local food infrastructure. Using the planning system to promote food growth is growing in popularity. Local food growing can encourage healthy lifestyles, enhance biodiversity, and reduce food miles, which can all have positive impacts on carbon emissions. The policy will support the use of land as new allotments, orchards, and for local food growing spaces and production and other infrastructure that supports the local food system. The policy will expect developers to engage with district and parish councils who manage allotments to identify needful areas for food growing. Within new developments, the policy will support the inclusion of productive trees and plants in landscaping schemes, including community orchards. And the policy will also seek to avoid the loss, the loss of the best and most versatile agricultural land. Next slide, please. Next policy is IC8, sustainable transport and movement. The integration of land use and transport, including public transport, are essential to delivering communities that are sustainable, healthy, and inclusive. Transport-related emissions are a significant contributor to climate change, as well as having an impact on the quality of the environment. The policy will seek to improve accessibility and widen transport choices by requiring new developments to be served by choice of transport modes, including public transport, cycle routes, bridleways, and footpaths. The policy will promote working with partners to improve accessibility by enhancing sustainable transport opportunities and encouraging development that reduces the need to travel. The policy will also require developments to be designed around the principles of walkable or cyclable neighbourhoods, giving priority to people over vehicular traffic to make journeys by walking and cycling more direct and convenient over the car. Next slide, please. The next policy is policy IC9, parking standards and electric vehicle charging points. This policy will set out the requirements for managing vehicle and cycle parking and seek to update the existing parking standards to provide flexibility for development to respond to its transport context. Although cycling and walking will be the preferred method of travel with regards to reducing congestion and emissions, it is recognised that vehicle transport will still be necessary. Electric vehicles will play an important role in the transition away from combustion engines. However, the shift to electric vehicles will rely on significant increase in the availability of charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. Next policy is IC10, the former Lewes to Uckfield railway line. The reopening of the Lewes to Oxford railway line would provide an additional public transport link that would not only ease the pressure on the existing network and provide additional rail route between Brighton and London, but also make more sustainable travel options available to more people across the region. The route of the Lewes to Oxford line has been safeguarded through planning policy for a number of years, and it's proposed that this will continue in the new plan. The new local plan will restrict any development along the former railway line that would significantly prejudice its reinstatement in the future. Meanwhile, uses that would not prejudice the future reinstatement of the line may be considered acceptable. Next slide, please. And finally, on this theme, policy IC11, public rights of way. Public rights of way form an important component of the sustainable transport network and should be protected and enhanced. The public rights of way network can provide traffic-free alternatives to on-road routes, which can encourage people to travel by cycle or foot. This policy will ensure that public rights of way are protected and not adversely affected by development. Where this is not possible, the policy will require that good quality, safe and convenient alternative provision is made or suitable replacement public rights of way are secured. Thank you, that's that section. So I'll hand over to Michael for the design and built environment theme.
Thanks, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, I'll be talking to you today about the design and built environment theme. Next slide, please, Nadine. So the aim of this thematic area is to enhance the high quality and character of the district's towns, villages and rural environment, whilst ensuring that all forms of development respond positively to climate change and create inclusive, healthy places. We're proposing 5 new policies for this area, and we're proposing to carry forward 3 policies from the Lewes Local Plan Part 2, those being Policy DM26 Refuse and Recycling, Policy DM31 Advertisements, and Policy DM32 Telecommunications Infrastructure. So what I'll do is I'll go through some of the evidence base and some policy context that fits into this area, and then I'll summarise some of the policies following on from that. So the main piece of evidence that feeds into this thematic area is the Lewes Landscape Character Assessment. So the Lewes Landscape Character Assessment has detailed that there are 7 distinct local character types, and there are 15 distinct local character areas within the district. Within the district, in the northern part of the plan area, the dominant landscape character type identified is that of the western low weald, which exhibits a highly rural and tranquil character due to the land use and the enclosure from mature vegetation with localised references to villages via church towers. In the more coastal region of the district, towards the south of the district, the dominant landscape character type identified is that of downland fringe, which exhibits urbanising features with localised areas of high tranquility, where panoramic views are available towards the South Downs National Park immediately to the north and wind turbines out to the sea. This area also represents a transitional landscape between the South Downs National Park, settlement edges, and the coastline. So, in line with the Lewes Landscape Character Assessment, there's also a strong emphasis on design within the National Planning Policy Framework. So a couple of years ago, the National Planning Policy Framework was updated to have a much more prominent focus on design. There were a couple of paragraphs added to the design section. And on top of that, the National Design Guide and National Model Design Code were also released by the government to sit alongside the National Planning Policy Framework. The main paragraphs of note within the National Planning Policy Framework that were added mandated that local planning authorities would now have to have some form of design guide or design code adopted. The way that the paragraphs are worded do give a reasonable amount of flexibility in terms of the scope and scale of the design guides, and that feeds quite nicely into neighbourhood plans. As within the district, neighbourhood plans have been a very popular form of placemaking, There's been a really strong emphasis on design as a key principle within all of the made neighbourhood plans within our area. The majority of them contain quite detailed character assessments, and a couple of them even have their own design guides and design codes. So the approach that we're looking to take is to set out a series of design policies, which will be built upon by 2 design guides as supplementary planning documents or their replacements, that will provide more detail to other policies within the new local plan. One of the guides will be sort of a high-level strategic document, and one will set out sort of a householder application design considerations. So the strategic level guide will set out expectations around best practice in site layout, including details such as, but not limited to, expected densities and clear ways of access. Whereas the householder application design guide sets out sort of best practice and guidance around issues such as overlooking, overshadowing, and those sorts of things. With the vision of this is that neighbourhood plan design guides, codes, and design sections will provide the sort of locally specific site-by-site detail that communities expect development proposals to adhere to. So I'll now go on to summarise the policies that we're proposing. Next slide, please, Nadine. So the first policy within this thematic area is our strategic policy, which would be policy D1, development principles. This policy would set out the overarching principles for achieving high quality development, and it would require that all development responds to the climate emergency, improves connectivity within the district, enhances the character of the district, and responds to the district's communities. This policy in particular relates to how the proposed development fits into the wider area. So it's more concerned with how the development fits into the wider area, as opposed to what is contained within the red line sort of site boundary of a proposed development. This policy is required because Lewes District benefits from a variety of built and natural spaces, from sort of historic coastal towns and rural villages to biodiverse countryside and open clifftop and seaside locations. And in addition, as was sort of mentioned earlier, the district benefits from communities that have invested in neighbourhood planning quite heavily, and we're really wanting to reflect that in our strategic policy. So next slide, please, Nadine. So the next policy, policy D2, achieving high quality design in development. This policy is proposed to set out requirements for the design quality to be achieved by development. So where policy D1 was more interested in setting out how a proposed development would fit into the wider area, this policy is more interested in how development will be designed within the red line site boundary of a site. So this policy will require proposals to demonstrate how they are designed with communities in mind, how they will achieve accessible development, how they will respond positively to climate change, and how they will enhance the local character of the district. So this policy is required as high quality design is fundamental to the creation of high quality spaces. High quality spaces contribute to community cohesion and inclusion. They influence safety and security and encourage economic investment. The design of the built environment is intrinsic in promoting modal shift, which in turn positively influences health and well-being, as well as addressing the causes and effects of our changing climate. It is important that high quality design and placemaking puts people first, so that places are welcoming, they feel safe, and are enjoyable and easy for us to use. So next slide, please, Nadine. The next policy is policy D3, landscape character. So the vision for this policy is that it would set out how development should address landscape character. This policy would require development to respect key characteristics of landscape character areas. Those landscape character areas could be those defined within the Lewes Landscape Character Assessment or those defined within neighbourhood plans. It would also require development to retain and enhance existing landscape features, strengthen or create green and blue infrastructure opportunities, and also respects the clear delineation and separation of villages. So this policy is required as Lewes District benefits from a variety of landscapes, including sort of rivers, valleys, forests, chalk cliffs, and downlands. In addition, South Downs National Park bisects the plan area and has a primary designation that relates to landscape character. And as such, the local plan needs to properly account for the variety of landscapes that are present and ensure the differing areas are properly considered in decision making by ensuring development responds positively to the landscape character. Next slide, please, Nadine. So policy D4, conservation and enhancement of heritage assets. This policy would set out how development that affects conservation areas, historic buildings and their settings will be controlled. This policy will look to support proposals that look to include newer technologies to allow for solutions that will reduce carbon emissions and assist with adapting to our changing climate, in line with the latest Historic England guidance. So this policy is required because although there is a wealth of national guidance on heritage assets that's contained within the NPPF and planning practice guidance, there is a well-established structure in terms of heritage policies, meaning that sort of locally specific planning policies are more limited than in other planning policy areas. However, in order to sympathetically manage heritage assets as part of the development process, there must be a clear understanding of the significance of the asset and the contribution of its setting. Upgrading, what we've chosen to focus on with this policy, or what we're looking to focus on with this policy, is to upgrade the fabric of traditional buildings in general, as that's seen to be a key part of the push to improve energy efficiency across the country. The Committee on Climate Change did conclude that at least 90% of existing buildings in the UK should have energy efficient retrofits for the UK to meet its zero carbon targets. This analysis does, however, recognise that some buildings cannot be adapted to eliminate all emissions. However, there are things that can be done, provided that the correct approach is taken. This policy is therefore needed to support owners of heritage assets to undertake sensitive works to address the performance of their buildings in line with best practice guidance for heritage assets. Next slide, please, Nadine. So the final policy that relates to this theme area that's proposed is policy D5, public realm. So this policy will set out expectations for the quality of the public realm within proposals. This policy will require proposals to optimise opportunities for greening, creating streets that do not allow vehicles to dominate, incorporating robust social infrastructure where appropriate, and use gateways, focal points, and landmarks to assist with wayfinding. So the idea with this policy, and the reason that this policy is required, is that the quality of the public realm has a significant influence on residents' quality of life, because it impacts sort of how people relate to place, how secure they feel, whether they feel like they belong in a place. And it also has an influence on a range of health and social factors. In addition, creating and protecting high quality streets and other open spaces, both public and private, is a key part of adapting to climate change pressures, supporting biodiversity, and promoting active and healthy lifestyles. Just for clarity, the public realm is comprised of the spaces between, around, and within buildings, streets, squares, parks, and open spaces, with all components playing a key role in supporting public life and fostering social interactions. The negative effects of traffic should be minimised to ensure people's enjoyment of the public realm is maximised. In addition, the lighting of the public realm, be that natural or artificial, requires careful consideration to ensure that places and spaces are appropriately lit, and there is an appropriate balance between issues of safety and security and reducing light pollution. That's the end of the policy summary in this section. I will say again, I'd really encourage people to go and look at the topic papers and to look at the overall consultation document and read these policies in detail, because this is just a summary at this point. I'll hand back to you, Nadine. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Max and Michael, for those insights into those two policy themes. Before we move on to the Q&A session of this, just to remind you in terms of how to get involved with the consultation and where you can expect us to come along and talk about the consultation in person in the new year. So as I've said in previous webinars, our preference for comments on the consultation is to receive them through the consultation portal, and that will allow you to make comments against every single policy direction in the consultation document. We would encourage you not to use email as the way of providing comments, if only in that we then have to upload everything onto the system. And if you haven't clearly indicated which question you're responding to, then there's an element of us having to try and read through and understand and then apportion or assign those comments to a particular question, and we may not always get that right. So but also we would have to then come back to you and ask you a bunch of questions around GDPR, data protection, before we can put that information up onto the system. So if you are able to, I would encourage you to use that medium as the way for responding back to us on the consultation. And if you are unable to, then please do contact us and see. We'll see what other alternative ways we can get you to respond and provide us your comments. But those options are there. It's just where the preference lies. In terms of finding out more, the link at the bottom, that is the link to the consultation page, landing page. So that's where you'll find the consultation, the QR code in the top right of the screen. If you were to use your mobile, and you can scan that, and that again takes you straight through to the consultation page. In terms of the consultation itself, it is running until the 8th of February. It's really important that we hear from you. I mean, your views and comments that you provided at the issues and options stage have helped shape the consultation that's out there at the moment. Your views and comments to this will help shape the draft plan that we will put out to consultation in next year. And really, it is your opportunity to tell us what you think of both the policies and the directions that we want to take those policies in for the draft plan, but also if there are any policies which are missing. So again, do tell us. In terms of the webinars, as we said at the start, this is the final set. Today's webinar is the final one. We have recorded all of them, so you are able to view these from the consultation page, and you can go back and look over them. You can share them with your friends and family, and they will be there as a reference throughout the consultation. In the new year, we will carry out some in-person events. We're just finalising the locations of those, and once we've got those, we will put them up onto the website, as well as send out a reminder or an email to everybody telling you where we will be. That is the end of the presentation. Just want to say thank you very much to everybody who's joined us over the series. We hope you found them useful, and that they will help you to formulate your response to the consultation. So I'll hand over to Lee, who's going to help us with the Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes before we need to finish. So over to you, Lee. Think we may have lost Lee, so what I will do is I'll ask the questions. The first one, Matt, I think you might be best placed to answer this, is what opportunities do we see for retrofitting sustainable urban drainage to reduce surface water runoff flooding, particularly in the upstream areas of the plan area and on the River Ouse? Just before you answer that, just to make a point clear, the plan area that we are planning for through this local plan is for all of the district which is outside of the South Downs National Park. So all of the policies that we've talked about today and in previous webinars are only for those areas of the district which fall outside of the park. The park will be preparing its own local plan, which will cover the areas that it covers, and that area extends beyond Lewes districts as well. So just to make that clarity there. So just back to the question, Matt, in terms of SUDs, what are the opportunities that we see for providing those?
I think it's difficult to go into detail on that at this point in time. There are some evidence studies that will help inform that. So there's the water cycle study that I mentioned earlier. There's also a strategic flood risk assessment level 1 that will look at these issues. But in terms of the actual opportunities, it's not something that I can answer right now. It's maybe something we can come back to with the FAQs.
Thanks for that. I think the next question is probably for me, and I alluded to it in the presentation as I was closing it there. So have we got a program of events for in-person consultation events in January? Yes, we do. We're looking to hold these in different parts of the district or the plan area. We haven't bottomed out exactly the times of these, but we will be working to get those finalised as soon as possible. Certainly, we are looking towards the latter half of January for those events to take place. So hopefully that answers your question there on those. The next question is fairly straightforward. In terms of the open spaces study and the playing pitch strategy, who carried these out for us, Matt?
Yeah, the open space strategy was prepared by the Environment Partnership, and the playing pitch strategy was prepared by 4 Global. Both of these were completed in 2020.
Okay, and the final question, I think, is again one for you, Matt. In terms of additional electric vehicle charging points, will the provision of these be promoted in conservation areas and within and outside of listed buildings to help increase EV take-up?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I don't think we're at a point where we've got enough detail to move up to answer that right now. So again, maybe that's something that we can come back to with the FAQs.
Okay. Are there any other questions from anybody that I haven't asked or you would like to ask in the final closing moments? There's a question come in just now. How will we deal with statements of intent from Southern Water regarding retrofitting SUDs that are neither deliverable or affordable? That one for you, Matt?
Again, I'm not sure that's something that I can answer right this minute. I think maybe we have to come back to that.
I think with that one, we'll probably need to take it away, digest it, and then look through both through the draft plan policy in terms of how we respond to those statements, but also we will put something out through the FAQ in terms of a response to that in the meantime. Okay. In the final closing moment, any last questions before I try and close us? Okay, in which case, just want to say thank you very much to everybody who's joined us today. As I said earlier, hopefully that you found those slides and presentation from both Matt and Michael helpful. Thank you to the team for taking this task on, and finally, just to wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a festive New Year. We will be out in the new year in various parts, so hopefully we will see you at some of those events. In the meantime, thank you very much, and goodbye.